it gave me this newfound strength in knowing that even if, between the death and the fear and all the stuff that can happen in life, if I'm always going to be there to hold my own hand to walk through that, then I'm always going to be okay.
Welcome to The Bright Side of Life, a podcast where people share their personal stories of struggles, pain, and grief, but through all of that, they are still able to find the joys in life. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Bright Side of Life. I am your host, Melissa Bright, and today I am excited because I am talking with Gabrielle Stone. Gabrielle is an actress, director, dancer, podcaster, and how I came to know her is she is the author of an incredible book called Eat, Pray, FML, also known as Fuck My Life. Gabrielle, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming on here. So, before we get started, I kind of wanted to share with the listeners of how I even came to know who you are. It's kind of a little bit of a crazy story, but I came to know Gabrielle because I woke up one morning super early, like 5 a.m. for some reason, and I just started scrolling on Instagram and I came across your page, don't know how, and this was around October when stuff started coming out. Something on your Instagram, either an ex-boyfriend, ex-husband had
Yep.
either taken down your page or was trying to. And I literally was like, it's like 5:30 and I'm like scrolling and digging and scrolling and I'm like, oh my God, I have went down this rabbit hole. I think I even like messaged you and said something and I'm like, I don't even know what I
You're
said,
like,
but
I'm invested.
I was definitely invested, and then I found out that there was a book that was recently released, and I guess that's how all this was coming to be, is there was an ex-husband or whatever that was not happy,
Yes,
but that's how I came to know
I
Gabrielle in the
love it.
book.
Of course, my exes are what intro me to the world. It comes with the territory when you write a tell-all book that your unhappy ex-husband is a part of, that there's probably going to be some backlash.
Yep, exactly. So, if we can just start, can you tell the listeners what your book is about? Because you're gonna do a way better job than me.
Yes. So I was married for almost 2 years, and I found out that my husband had been having an affair with a 19-year-old for 6 months. And I filed for divorce, left. Shortly after that, I met a guy, fell madly in love with each other, and we had a whirlwind romance of like, meet my family, have my babies, this is my person, all the fairy tale stuff. And he convinced me to join him on a month-long trip to Italy. 48 hours before we were getting on the plane, he told me he needed to go by himself. And I was absolutely devastated. I mean, he broke my heart like my ex husband never could have dreamed of doing. And in the throes of heartbreak and a pool of tears on my bed, I was like, well, I have a decision to make. And that's either stay at home heartbroken or go travel Europe for a month by myself. So I went solo with a backpack and did 6 countries over the span of a month and wrote Eat, Pray, FML about it.
That is amazing. And I know when people first hear this, it's a lot for people to process.
It was a lot for me to process.
Yeah. Be the one living it.
Right.
So for people who have not read the book yet, and without giving too much away, one might be wondering, how the hell does she go from a cheating husband, filing for divorce, falling madly in love 2 weeks later? Can you kind of explain how that happens? And at least for outsiders, it might have looked easy just walking away from the divorce.
Mhm.
Because you said it did happen so
Yeah.
fast, 2 weeks
Yeah.
later.
Totally. And for some context, what's even crazier is that finding out about the affair, filing for divorce, meeting the next guy, falling in love, and going to Europe all happened in the span of 3.5 months. I mean, it was insane. And I'm very well aware of that. But I had been really unhappy in my marriage for about 6 to 7 months. I just didn't know the reasons. We were in therapy. I was working my ass off to try and like get us back to a place of love and happiness. On his end, that was not happening for obvious reasons. But I had been in a loveless marriage for probably 8 or 9 months. And it was really bad the last six. We were super unhappy. I was thriving professionally in my career and really miserable at home. So when all of these things about the affair came to light, it almost was like an out for me. And I'm really thankful that he did something so drastic that made it so easy for me to walk away, because if he didn't, I would have stayed in that relationship for a lot longer, because I had made a commitment and we were married and I had taken vows and like I would have worked on my marriage. Um, but he made it very easy to walk away. Um, and I really had been so disconnected from him for so long that when I found out how deep all of the betrayal went, which is all detailed in the book, um, it really was like there was no question in my mind that I was leaving. And when I did leave, it felt like this weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. It was like, oh my God, I can breathe. I'm getting a second chance at life, and this is all happening for a reason. Because of that mindset and because of how disconnected I was from the relationship the moment I drove away from handing him the papers, um, I was weirdly okay. Like my mom, my friends, people closest to me were like, "Why are you so okay?" I mean, don't get me wrong, like I had my screaming, crying fits when I found out about everything, but I I wasn't heartbroken. I was angry, I was betrayed, I was upset that the person that had promised to keep me and my body safe had done this to me, but I wasn't heartbroken because I wasn't in love with him.
Yeah.
So here I am, fresh off of, leaving my house. And keep in mind, I had been unhappy for the 7 to 8 months. It had been really bad for 6 months. I had found out about the actual affair 2 weeks before I left the house when he was on a work trip, and was getting a lawyer and like figuring out the what I was going to do. So when I met the next guy, whose name is Javier, it had been a solid month of me being like, I'm getting divorced. This is over and I'm leaving. Yes, that's still wildly fast, I'm aware. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, "Oh, that's shockingly fast," then you haven't been through something like this. But the amount of DMs that I get from women that are like, "Oh my God, the same thing happened to me the second I left this. I like fell into the arms of so and so." It's a lot more common than you think. But I'm self-aware enough to know that if I had been heartbroken and really like devastated about the end of my marriage, I would have never entered into another relationship before I was ready to do so. So this new man swings into my life, and we end up falling crazy in love with each other. And I wasn't going to fight the universe on it. It was so apparent when he first invited me to Europe. I thought he was fucking crazy. And I remember saying to him, "Okay, well, when are you leaving?" And he said September 4th, which would have been my 2-year wedding anniversary. And when I asked him when he was coming home, he said October 4th, which is my late father's birthday. So I was like, "Fuck, okay, universe, I hear you. I'll buy my goddamn ticket." Like
Mm.
it was like, okay, it's meant to be. I
Yep.
get it. So I just kind of trusted in that and fell. Unfortunately, I fell flat on my face, but I fell. So yeah, it happened in a very quick time span, but I don't think if it would have happened the way that it did, I would have had the balls to just pick up and go on the trip anyways.
Right. It was like the opportunity was there and you might as well do it. And how you said it just now and how you kind of worded out your divorce and how everything played out. Of course, I read the book, but you worded it so well, like stuff had been going wrong way before that. And so
Yeah.
when you said that that was just your easy out, and like you said, a lot of people don't know how to walk away, and like you said, it's a marriage, they take vows, they don't, they want to stick around, and so it did make it easier on you. Not
Yeah.
not easier, but then again easier.
No, but it did, and I had been doing that stick around and work on it. I had been doing that for 6 months really diligently. I mean, everything our therapist had suggested I was putting into practice, like, every single thing, and I couldn't figure out why, like, nothing was shifting and nothing was working. Um, so when I found out how deep everything went, it was like, and look, I know people that have stayed in their marriage or their relationship after cheating's happened, and they've gotten through it and it's made them stronger. So more power to the people that
Mhm.
can do that. That was never an option for me. It never would be an option for me. And I didn't want to.
Right.
It really was like, oh my God, like, run. He opened the door for you. Run.
Yep, exactly. And I don't remember, did he go to therapy, your ex-husband,
He
with
went
you?
to yeah, we went to therapy together, which is so funny when you look back on it. It's like, dude, why were you spending the money and wasting your time on, like, doing that when you were fully in a full-on relationship with another female? It's
Right.
like, why? Like, just let's just break up and do it before you have to have all of, like, the anxiety on top of you trying to juggle 2 relationships.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll jump forward a little bit, and we're gonna be referencing the book a little bit, but of course, I'm not gonna give it all away because then nobody would read the book, and you need to read the book. So, you had said in the book that you hadn't really ever traveled too much alone. Like, this would be your first big trip going solo. And what did your friends and family have to say about you going on a month trip now by yourself?
So yes, you're correct. I had traveled, like, for work to go to a film set, but that's, you travel alone and then you meet people and then you're spending a month and shooting with them. I had never traveled to solo travel alone. And the thought of that to me was daunting. But I knew in the moments that it was happening, that it was happening for a reason. I could see that reason very clearly. From my childhood, I lost my dad when I was 6. I lost my boyfriend when I was in high school, when I was 18. And I had a huge fear of abandonment. And that manifested in my life as never wanting to be alone, always wanting to either have a man in my life or a roommate or my mom around or friends around. And this situation was the universe's clear way of being like, well, Gabrielle, we're going to go face that shit head on. Have fun. But my friends, bless their souls, were insanely supportive of me still going. They were all pretty mad at Javier. um, it was really hard for them to understand what he was going through, what we as a pair were going through. Um, because of course you want to just protect your friend and be angry for them and not have them be hurt. Um, my mom was furious with him. And she actually sat down the morning that I was going to the airport and she looked at me and she's like, you don't have to go. Like, you can just bail and not go. And I looked at her, I was like, no, I have to. I really do. And she was terrified for me to go, but the amount of pride she had in the fact that I was going outweighed the fear. Um, and, for me, I didn't know anything about hostels, and the only thing I knew on the plane ride to Europe was that there's a movie about them and people get brutally fucking murdered in it. Like, I didn't know that that was a thing that you do when you travel. And of course now I'm like the biggest advocate of it, and I'm like, they're the best, they're so much fun. Like, here are my top favorites.
You
Um,
sold me on them.
Oh my God. It's like it's adult summer camp. It's
Yeah.
freaking great. And that's how you meet so many awesome people traveling. It's really wonderful. But yeah, it was a whole, new experience. And I really had to walk through the fear to get to the other side of that. And I'm so happy that I did.
Yeah. So, was your abandonment issues, was that something that you already knew that you had before going on to this trip?
I did. I knew that, my mom, apart from being an actress, is a world healer and does energetic work, and clairvoyant channeling with people all over the world. So I grew up in a household of that. So I'm very aware of my childhood traumas and the beliefs that they caused, and the healing aspect of that. So I was very aware that, like, that was my thing. That was my story. that I carried through my life was fear of abandonment, which, in a very deep subconscious literal sense is like when I love someone, they die, because that's what I had been taught twice in my life, which is a lot to learn from, the males in my life. Um, so I knew that I had that. What I didn't know was that I was protecting myself in my love life because of that. So I didn't realize this until I sat down with Javier and had a conversation about grief that he was going through. And he said to me, he was like, I'm scared to death that if I love anyone as much as I love my brother, that they'll die. And I was like, oh my God, I so relate to that. I've dealt with that belief all my life. I loved my dad and he died. I loved my high school sweetheart and he died. And I was like, and I married my ex-husband because I wasn't fully in love with him and he was safe. And it was like this huge realization that I had, that in order to protect myself from this belief that had, been proven to me
Mhm.
throughout my life, that I married someone, I took the biggest step you can take with someone who I wasn't fully in love with, because it was going to keep my heart safe, which is such a twisted and fucked up like way to go about things. But subconscious beliefs do that to you. You don't ever, it's not a conscious thing. You're not like, oh, I don't marry this person, let's, or I don't love this person, let's go get married.
Right.
It's not something that you're conscious of, but it was a huge realization for me to have.
Yep. Yep. And I think that is so awesome that you realized, first of all, the abandonment issues, because I'm 35 and it probably took me till I was 32 or 33 to even realize that. My dad wasn't around when I was a little girl. And then I lost my mom at 25. And as you
Mm,
know, I just lost my dad a month ago. And like the abandonment issues are like real. And unfortunately, it took me forever to really realize that. And I think and I'm sure you can preach this, is self-awareness is the key to like freedom, is just knowing what the hell's going on.
yeah, but I mean, I'm so sorry that you've I can't, I'm terrified of the day that my mom goes, because
Mhm.
she has been my person since I lost my dad as a 6-year-old little girl. And we're so close and we're best friends, which I'm sure,
Yep.
you relate to.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, she's the one person in my life that's been with me from the beginning, who has not abandoned me.
Right.
So when that, day eventually, hopefully very far, far in the future comes, I'm sure I'm going to have some stuff to work through around that. It's not like you just figure out a subconscious belief, wave a magic wand, and it's gone. Like those things always come up, and it's a constant thing to continue to work through, for sure.
Yeah. Just a little bit. So I developed really bad anxiety after my mom passed away, and it took me years to figure out what it was. And it literally I finally found out when life was so good, that's when my anxiety would happen the worst. And
Mhm.
I'm like, how is this possible? And I finally figured out that I was so scared to lose my boyfriend. I'm
Mm,
scared to lose my daughter. And so when life is going so good, it's like I'm trying to prepare myself for,
yeah,
of course, what I can't control.
right.
But I'm like, where is it at? What do I need to fight off?
Yeah, you're like, it can't be this good, so something terrible must be coming.
Yep,
I
yep,
so I so relate to that.
and it is freaking awful to be in that state all the time, but that's
Yeah,
what therapy's for.
right? It's exhausting. I've been there and I've walked through that too.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Europe. What was it like being a female all by yourself, completely alone in all these different countries?
People are always curious to hear if I felt safe. I felt 100% safe and fine 98% of the time. The 2% was in Paris, and it was because I put myself in a stupid situation. So I was walking down the street. It was my first night in Paris, and my hostel was in kind of a sketchier part of Paris. It wasn't like the best area. I guess it would be comparable to kind of like downtown LA. Um, and I was walking along the streets and I bumped into this guy who was like shorter than me, very skinny, like he wasn't a threatening stature whatsoever. Um, and he had a London accent and we started chatting. He's like, "Oh, you're American." And he was like, "Let me walk you around a little bit." And it was still light out. And I don't know what possessed me to be like, okay, sure. When I was on my way to go, have dinner by myself and do some writing, which would have been a way better idea. Um, but we linked arms and started walking. I quickly found out in the conversations that we were having that his intentions were not super great. Still, even when I found that out, I didn't feel super threatened because, I mean, if push came to shove, like I would have taken him in a fight. Like he was tiny. Um, but we ended up waltzing into the legit drug dealing part of Paris. And I was like, oh, okay, great. And this is where I'm going to die.
And this is where
um,
the story ends.
Right, and the book just stops here at chapter 6. And he I ended up, like, saying, like, "Look, you need to take me back to where I need to go." He walked me back a little ways after a lot of arguing, and when I saw the train station, I was able to, like, be like, "Okay, I know how to get to my hostel from here," so I said goodbye to him there. Um, so that was the only time I felt unsafe on the trip, and when I actually that same night when I walked back from the train station, I was walking into my hostel and I had my hands in my pockets, and I
Mhm.
went through this, like, big crowd of people, and I felt a hand slip into my pocket, and luckily I was, like, clutching onto my phone because if my phone would have gone on that trip, I'd have been like, look, you can take all the men away from me you want, but the second you take my goddamn cell phone, like, I'm done. That would have broken me. And so that first night in Paris was, like, really jarring for me. Again, I put myself in that situation. Like, if you're a solo female traveler, be smart, like, go out during the daytime. And look, I've been out at night by myself and felt fine. Like, you just stay where it's light and, like, make good
Yeah.
decisions and don't get drunk by yourself. And, like, if you're gonna go out and party, go with a group from the hostel, like, be smart. Um, but I personally didn't ever feel unsafe. I loved the freedom of walking around the streets of the city and hopping on a train, and it was really, like, empowering for me to know that I was that capable and, like, could just be by myself.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the book, like, you didn't have to answer to anybody. If you wanted to go sit somewhere for 3 hours, you could do that. If you wanted to go walk around for 5 hours, you could do that, and you didn't have to answer to anybody. And I think
Yeah,
that's
and
such a cool part of solo traveling.
it's so freeing, and it really gave me this new perspective on, like, oh, if I want to cry and, like, not go out and see sights and just sit in my Airbnb or my hostel and write for 5 hours, I can do that. If I want to go out and party, I can do that. Like, it really was a nice breath of fresh air because I was so used to traveling with a group or with a boyfriend or with
Mhm.
people that you don't ever have that. And
Yep.
it really changed the way that my trip looked because there were times where I would meet someone and they'd be like, "Hey, come meet me in, Mykonos in
Right.
2 weeks." And I went. Like, it
Yeah.
was, you're able to, when you have no plans in place and nowhere that you have to be, you can really, like, say yes to all the awesome things that the universe is bringing you.
Yeah. Would you consider yourself an overthinker?
Oh
Or
my God, 100%. Highly anxious, overthinker, overanalyzer. Yeah, big time.
'Cause in the book, I'm like, "Damn, she is just saying yes to all these things. She is going to Mykonos now." I'm like, "I don't know that I would have done that." Like, I'm pretty adventurous, but, the brain starts going and it's like,
Oh,
"What?"
totally, totally. But I felt like at that point, I was like, look, guys, like, my dad has died. My boyfriend in high school died. My husband cheated on me. The love that I, found after just ripped my goddamn heart out. What more could possibly happen? I was like, the universe owes me one. And I also, like, am very aware in my consciousness that I'm always safe and protected, and, like, I feel that in my energy, and I think that wards off certain things and attracts other things
Yep.
when you're conscious of that. So, I was like, look, I'm open to anything. I wasn't going to, like, make any insanely stupid decisions, but all of the people that I chose to go meet, if it was, like, a bigger decision like that,
Mhm.
I had made sure I knew a little bit,
Right. Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
felt okay with.
Yeah, definitely. Something I wanted to ask you before I started asking some of these questions was, at what point did you decide that you were going to write your book, And I guess why did you know it was going to be about this?
So I decided the day after I found out I was gonna go alone. I don't know what it was. I had never wanted to write a book. I just immediately was like, "Oh, my life has become a ridiculous sitcom, and I'm gonna write a book about it." Um, and I remember the night that Javier and I talked, and he had like decided that he was gonna go alone for sure. The previous night we had had
Mhm.
like the tearful 3-hour conversation where he had initially said that, and then the following evening we had like talked it through and decided that he was gonna in fact go alone, and I was like, I'm still gonna go too. And he dropped me off that night and he was like, how are you feeling, Gabs? And I said, like, I'm about to go on a journey of eat, pray, fuck my life. And that's the title. And the next day I bought a leather bound journal at Barnes and Noble, and I started writing my first day in London. I wrote 3/4 of the book on the trip in the journal. And it's not like I was journaling and then came home and turned it into a book. If you open my journal, it's like chapter one, and it's very, very close to what the published book is. Um, I finished it over the span of 2 months when I came home. So the whole thing was written in like 3.5 months. It just like flowed out of me.
That's awesome. That's what I was like, I gotta know this process because I'm like, that's just incredible. And that's what I kind of gathered. And I'm like, it feels like journal
Yeah.
type. And had you journaled before this trip?
When I was younger, like really, like diary and journal style, but not anything heavily. No.
Yeah. I swear, every time like there's somebody that's like the secret to life, it's like, well, I wake up and journal, and I'm like, there is
Right, right.
something to this.
I know. You're like, God damn it. I guess I'll start tomorrow. And then you don't.
I know. I started and then like sometimes I don't even want to like deal with the pain and I'm like, no, I'm just going to
Yeah.
journal stuff and I'm not ready to think about it. So I
Yeah, and that's totally fine and valid. I think my journaling has become my writing, now that I'm doing the second book. It's like by the time I'm done with the second installment of this series, it'll be like I could never write about my feelings again and be fine.
Oh man. Okay, I'm scrolling down here. Okay, so in what place do you feel that you did the most like most self-reflection?
Barcelona. Well, self-reflection. Yeah, Barcelona. Barcelona was where I first really felt like a little piece of me healed. Um, I met someone there that was like an integral part of my healing journey that kind of opened opened my eyes to the situation that I was in and like why a lot of things weren't okay when I was still, defending Javier about a lot of the
Mhm.
situations. Um, and it was so interesting because a lot of other people had said the same words to me, but it was there in Barcelona with this person I had met that I actually heard it for the first time and it resonated with me. I think Barcelona is also a magical freaking city. And, if I ever had to move abroad, I could live there. I just fell in love with the culture and the people and the food. And it really just, my heart felt at home there. So I think I did a lot of good writing there, and I really felt like I let go a little bit there. The first part of my trip, the countries that came before Barcelona were like searching for something and really like trying to heal. And then Barcelona, I just kind of let go and it started to happen on its own.
Yeah, which is so awesome. It just naturally happened. Do you think it's hard? Like, self-reflection is such a weird thing because it's like, oh, are we just going to sit down on this couch and just think and then just come up with an answer? Because it doesn't normally happen that way. What do you think is the hardest part about self-reflection?
That's a good question. I think the hardest part about self reflection is being honest with yourself because you can sit down and be like, okay, let's figure this out. And your brain will want to be like, okay, well, you did this, but we can justify it with this, and then we'll get to this outcome. And then if you really sit down and turn your brain off and go to your heart, which is a lot about, kind of what my thought onion technique is about. Then you're really like, okay, I really have to get honest with myself to see what's going on underneath the surface if I'm ever going to want to have a different outcome and start to heal. So I think the hardest part of doing that is to not lie to yourself in the process just because it's easier.
Yep. My answer was going to be just the truth, because
Yeah,
sometimes the truth is really fucking hard to
100%.
to face. So I'm glad you brought up the thought onion. So one of my questions was, were these, so I guess it might be obvious, but were the revelations that you were writing about in your book, like, were they coming as you were writing?
Oh yeah. So I literally was walking on the streets of London when I came up with the thought onion. It was my first day in London. I was walking around. I was like, I'm such a badass. I've come all the way across the world by myself. Like it just had this totally empowering day of being alone. And I sat down at a cafe, turned on my Wi-Fi, and got a bunch of pictures from Javier's first day in Rome. And it triggered me. I mean, I just totally went into the gutter around it. And I was like so upset because that was the trip that I was supposed to be on with the
Right.
man that I was supposed to be kissing on those stupid steps. And so I stormed out of the cafe and started walking back to the train. And I was like huffing and puffing at myself. And then my inner voice was like, do you want to figure out why you're upset or do you want to just continue to be upset? So I like rolled my eyes. I was like, all right, fine. And there on the streets of London was where the thought onion was born. And the thought onion is my technique where you can look at a thought or a reaction that you have and dissect it so you can figure out what's at the root core of it. So you look at it like an onion. And the first layer is the superficial thought. And that's usually your initial thought or reaction that happens when you're in a situation that's often superficial.
Mhm.
And you take a step back and you peel that layer back. And then the second layer is the authentic layer. And that is where you're it's the emotion that triggers that superficial thought to happen in the first place, the reason why you're having that.
Mhm.
And then you peel that layer back and you get to the subconscious thought. And that's where the real like meat and potatoes is. So when you can get to your subconscious thought, which is usually a belief from years ago or, something traumatic that happened in your younger years or your childhood that you've carried with you for a long time, when you can get to that layer, that's what you need to shift or work on or heal in order to have a different reaction in the future. And
Yeah.
it was so funny because I remember when I got home that night in London, I wrote all this down and was like, the thought onion is such a lame name. Like, I have to come up with something better than that. And then I started, I kept doing them throughout my trip and I was like, oh, I'll change it later. I'll change it later. And then by the time I got home, it just stuck. And I was like, well, I guess it's staying like that. I mean, it is kind of a perfect representation of like what the actual technique is. So
It is, and I loved every one of them in the book, and it, like, I haven't done one yet, but I'm going to, 'cause it makes such perfect sense.
yeah, dude, I have readers that email me and DM me and they're like, I have a journal that's specifically just thought onions and that's all I do now. And I love it.
Oh my gosh, that's great. We need to have, like, an offset of that, the blooming onion, whatever that
Yeah, I love it.
metaphor can be. Okay, so I just asked that one. Okay, so one question is, to me, before I even read your book, you exude confidence. You just seem a very confident person. So, what would you say is the difference between loving yourself and having confidence? Do they go hand in hand? Can you be confident without loving yourself? I just asked you a lot of questions, but does
Yeah, but
that
I
make
love
sense?
all of them. Yes, it does. Thank you for that, first of all. Yes, I think that loving yourself and being confident are not the same thing. I think you can be confident and not love yourself. Because I did it. I would say I've always been pretty confident. Like I love being in front of people. I'm, life of the party. I love to get out and like I'll be the only one on the dance floor. Um, but I never really knew how to love myself. And I was searching for that on this trip and knew that it was kind of the key to everything. Everyone had been like, can't love yourself or you can't love someone else until you really love yourself, or you have to learn how to love yourself before you can be in a successful relationship. And I was like, okay, well, I hear you. I understand that. Can anyone tell me how to do that? And nobody could give me a clear, just like set of instructions on how to love yourself. And that was kind of what I was searching for this whole trip. And I did end up finding it. It wasn't until I came back from my crazy journey, which is why I write about this in the epilogue. But for me, it's called the self love cocktail. And what you do is you sit down and you write down a list of all the things that you're capable of giving your soul that make your soul happy. So for me, that was dancing, creating, meditating, going to the gym, eating right. And I would write my list out, and every day I would give myself at least one of those things. Then after a couple weeks, I would start with 2 things and then 3 things. And before you know it, you wake up feeling so much better because you're loving yourself. And when it finally clicked for me that self love just means giving your soul the things it loves and to make it happy, it totally changed my life around. Because not only was it now not this crazy, weird, like metaphysical thing where you're looking in the mirror, telling yourself how much you love yourself and feeling crazy on the inside. Um, but it was something that I could actually control, and things that I could actively do every day. It completely changed the feelings I had about self-love from the inside out and completely turned my life around. So for me, it was when I discovered that I think my confidence went even not higher, but like stronger because I was more grounded in myself, and I was filling my cup up without just showing everybody my cup, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yep, it does. I love the self cocktail. Once again, I'm going to use it because I'm
Yes.
I'm very much a metaphor person, an analogy person, and whenever I read that in the book, I'm like, "Oh, that it's so simple." Like
It's so
sometimes
simple.
the things that are like the answer to everything are so simple and you're like, "Oh my god."
Like,
So,
why did it take that long? Yeah, that's how I
seriously.
felt.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, what did you ever ask your mom like what it meant to love yourself? And if you ever asked her, what was her answer to that?
I did. I don't know if I ever straight up asked her. I remember us talking about it because she was telling me I needed to figure it out. And and I think at the time she had said to me, it's personal. So it's not something that anyone else can tell, which is true.
Mhm.
It's not something that someone else can tell you how to do. It's something that you have to find within yourself and practice and activate it. Which at the time was so frustrating because I'm like, God, just somebody give me instructions. But it was really beautiful because um, the second time my mom read the book, the first time when she read the rough draft, it was kind of like shock, fear, and like, oh my God, are you sure you don't want to change your name? Um, and the second time she read it, when it was like in its published, finished format, she she called me and she was in tears, and she was like, I was just working with one of my clients, one of her healing clients, and they were like, I just need a clear answer of how to love myself. And she was like, and I had just read it in my kid's book, and it was like a really beautiful full circle moment for both of us, um to see that I had not only learned it but developed a way to clearly give it to other people to put into practice.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, would you say before your journey, would you say that you didn't love yourself at all, or why do you think that you struggled with it? I mean, I don't want to answer for you, so I'm just going to stop there.
I think I loved myself conditionally. I loved myself when I felt really good about my body. I loved myself when I booked a role and I was on set and I was like, pursuing my dreams and making them happen. I loved myself when I was happy and, in a really thriving good relationship. But those are external things. And that's not loving yourself. That's being happy from external things, which is great and dandy and fine. I love those still, and we need those still. But loving yourself is an act of continuously, when you're sad, being like, okay, what can I give myself to make myself feel loved in this moment? When I'm depressed, when I'm sad, when I'm not working, when I'm a little overweight. when I'm in a shitty relationship or when I'm single or when I'm like, lonely. It's those moments when you're like, okay, what's on my list? What can I give myself? And how can I make sure I'm continuously loving myself? Because for me, the bottom line is that it's not a feeling. Yes, it will bring a feeling when you're doing it, but it's not just a feeling. It's an act that you have to give to yourself. It's something you have to do for yourself.
Yeah. Are you sure you don't want to be a therapist?
You know, my friends and I, because I'm the one that everybody calls for stuff, shocker. Although I'm like, have you seen what I've been through? I don't know if I'm the right person to be giving you relationship advice, guys. But I always joked that, I would love to be a therapist and I'd love to be a lawyer, but I never wanted to go to school for that amount of time for either of those professions. So I think I'm right in the sweet spot where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, no, but you're so knowledgeable and just some of your, your metaphors and everything. And I was curious about the self-love thing because I too, struggle with that. And I think I'm like, God, how did I get here? What cultivated that? Was it my past? Was it the abandonment? Was it actions that I've done that I've judged myself for? And so I'm just always kind of curious what that looks like for other people. So
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely. And I think that when you can see other people's examples of it and see, the different things that works for them, you're like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense to me. I resonate with that. How can I adopt that into my own
Yep.
practice?"
Yep, absolutely. In what ways did the journey of all of it, your trip to Europe, in what ways did the journey heal you?
Oh my god, so many ways. Some instantly just because I, felt so empowered and it really made me realize how capable I was in my own skin, in my life. And that all happened during that month on the trip. But then there were so many more things that happened in the long term that started there. Um, but I think the biggest thing that I healed, which has been my biggest story all of my life, was my abandonment. Not that it ever goes away and it's something that doesn't ever come up again because that's not simply not true. Um, but I realized on that trip when I was coming home that I'm never really abandoned because I will never abandon myself. And when that clicked for me, it was like I was able to drop at least a few of the layers of protection, um, because it gave me this newfound strength in knowing that even if, between the death and the fear and all the stuff that can happen in life, if I'm always going to be there to hold my own hand to walk through that, then I'm always going to be okay.
That's amazing. That's really, really cool. I seriously just because sometimes revelations just take so long for people to get, and so I feel like it's awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you went on your trip solo, obviously, but I'm sure that you have had people reach out that are in relationships. Okay, we're just gonna say so. We're gonna talk about about
Okay.
myself for a minute. And when I was reading your book, of course, I got like, oh my god, a solo trip by myself would be so wonderful. Nothing to do with my relationship with my boyfriend, but whenever you want to learn more about yourself, I feel there are so many advantages of doing things by yourself, like a solo trip. What would your advice be to somebody that is in a relationship that is one, wanting to learn how to love themselves, and two, are they able to go on solo trips? And I know that has to be like a well, whatever your spouse thinks, but um, would you encourage it?
I would 100% encourage it. And I would say, no, not whatever your spouse thinks. I would say you go to your spouse and you say, look, dude, I need to do this for myself. What do you need from me to make sure you feel comfortable with this? But like my soul wants to do this and it's happening. Yeah, I think it's a magical thing. I think every person, not even woman, every person should do a solo trip once in their life. You will learn so much about yourself. You will have such amazing experiences. It totally changed my life. I took my second solo trip by choice this time in 2019, and it was incredible. And I'm so thankful that I did that right before, 2020 and the pandemic hit. And I will take more in the future. It's a really, really incredible journey that you go on when you go solo. That's not to say, that traveling with your spouse isn't great. I love going on trips with the guy that I'm with now, my boyfriend, and it's wonderful and we have a freaking ball, but I will definitely go on solo trips in the future. There's something that's really magical about it that I fell in love with when I went to Europe.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like I know that my boyfriend would be fine with it, but sometimes it's so crazy because there's so much growing to always be or always having to be done.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're like when you are in a relationship, it gets hard to be able to do that all the time. So I just thought it was pretty cool that you were able to do that. Okay, so I just have a couple questions for you. After you got your heart ripped out twice in a matter of 2 months, you got back
Mhm.
from Europe. What was dating like after you found your new self love, healing, and you had that on your side now? Was it easier to date?
Well, that's kind of a tricky question because I came back and I had been on this like insane roller coaster in Europe, um, of like crazy highs and devastating lows. But when I came back, it was stagnant and still. And I went into a crazy dark place of depression. Um, and it took me a while to get out of that. And that's where I discovered the self love cocktail. It really like started as okay, what are the things that used to make you happy? You have to do at least one thing on this list a day if you want to sit in bed and not do anything else. And that's really like where it was created. So I came home and I was a freaking mess. And, this is all detailed and being written in the sequel book, but it for some reason when you're like I'm a mess, I'm not ready for a relationship, like nobody talked to me, everyone's like, oh hi, hey, I'd like to be in a relationship with you. And so I had a lot of that happening and I was so afraid that I was gonna make someone feel the way that Javier had made me feel. I was really hesitant to like do anything with anyone. Um, but so it took me a while to have that self-love piece that you're talking about.
Mhm.
Um, but I wouldn't say that once I had that in place, it made me not worried about being alone.
Yeah.
I always like wanted to be in a relationship and wanted that like comfort of a relationship. And once I had that self love, I wasn't worried about being single or being on my own, which was a
Right.
huge thing for me.
Yeah. Isn't it ironic how that happens?
Right? You just had to like go through all this shit to get there.
Right. What what would you hope your readers get out of reading your book?
I hope that everybody takes whatever they need from it. There's so much in there. Um, different things to relate to through the heartbreak and the grief, which is universal to every human, um, to the healing techniques and the different revelations that I have. So I hope when people read it, they take whatever they're needing in their life and it brings them some strength in their healing on their own personal journey. But as a bigger picture, I hope that people see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and it's fucking magical. So keep going, even when it seems really, really dark.
Yeah. And I can only imagine the responses that you have gotten from people that you probably would never even imagine that would have read your book and how
Y-
it resonated with them. That has
It's
to be really cool.
2020 was wild to be stuck at home and be able to connect online with so many different people from all over the world that are so affected by this book. It's been really incredible and very humbling and very full circle for me. And it's extremely fulfilling.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, just a couple more questions and then we will be finished. What is the one thing that you would like the world to know about Gabrielle?
Oh my God. Um,
My boyfriend told me to ask that question, so
that's a
sorry if you get
really
stumped.
no, that's a good question. I mean, I guess it's kind of a cop out to say I would want them to read my book because I think that every part of my heart and soul are on those pages. Um, but I guess if it was just a literal thing that I had to speak to someone, um, you know what? I'm gonna own it. I don't care if I sound a little ridiculous. That I'm a badass. Like to the definition, I am a badass woman.
Yes. There you go. Okay, so now everybody obviously wants to read your book. How can you tell the listeners how they can order your book?
Yes. So it's exclusively on Amazon. That's the only place you can get it. It's not in stores. You can also get it on my website, which is eatprayfml.com, which is where we have all the merch and fun stuff too. But it's on Amazon as a paperback, ebook, and audiobook. I voice the audiobook, which is a fun way to listen to it. And there's signed copies on my website as well.
Awesome. And I will also put her website in the show notes so you guys can go to that to order the book. Okay, one last question for you. And I ask all my guests this. In your own words, what does the bright side of life mean to you?
Oh, I love that. The bright side of life, to me is, like I said before, that, no matter how dark it seems, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is more beautiful than you could ever imagine. So, the bright side of life for me is the moment you step out of that tunnel into that sun.
Yes, beautiful. Well, Gabrielle, thank you so much for coming on here to share your story and to talk about your book. And I appreciate you taking the time today.
You're so welcome, girl. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Bright Side of Life. I hope you enjoyed listening to Gabrielle's story and are able to take away something with you that she said. Even for me, she said things that I hadn't considered before, like only loving herself conditionally. So I hope it was helpful for you as it was for me. Her book, I'm telling you, you gotta read it. It's fun, it's enlightening, and it's just an overall great read. Her website is listed in the show notes, so if you want to order her book, you can go to her website and check it out. I want to try something a little bit different this week, and I want to open up the conversation a little. So, the Bright Side of Life podcast has a Facebook group called, of course, the Bright Side of Life podcast. And I want to encourage anyone that enjoyed Gabrielle's story to join the group and to make a post letting me know what you thought and any takeaways you had, or maybe even questions you might have for Gabrielle. Hell, we can do this for any of the episodes. If if there's a certain episode that you liked or really hit home, let me know. I would love to hear and connect with you, and this would be a fun way to do it. The podcast link is listed in the show notes, so it'll take you directly to our Facebook group. Thank you again, guys, as always. And if you know someone that may need to hear Gabrielle's story, please share it with them, because we never know if this is the one that puts hope back in their heart.